we can have a better understanding of what is emptiness. Question? That's what I'm going to explain right now. So we can talk about things coming into existence dependently in three ways. Things exist depending on causes and conditions. So we'll use this example of the laptop here. One of the first conditions necessary, of course, someone needs to think about designing this laptop. And then, of course, all the raw materials needed to be gathered, they needed to be refined, all the various components needed to be manufactured, all those components needed to be assembled, and of course all the people and factories and so forth involved in the process also necessary. So all of these causes and conditions are necessary to have a laptop here. So that's, I think, quite straightforward. But of course everything exists depending on its parts. So similarly this laptop exists depending on its parts, because without the metal frame, the screen, the keyboard, the electronic components, the battery, without all of these parts there would be no laptop. Again, fairly straightforward. But remember, what we're saying here is that because things are dependent, they are not independent. That's the logic here. But I think most of us here are happy to accept that this laptop exists depending on causes and conditions, it exists depending on its parts, but also may be happy to accept that when we walk into the room there's already a laptop existing here on the table. Is that true? That should be impossible according to this logic.
Say it again.
We're happy to exist, that this laptop exists depending on causes and conditions. It exists depending on its parts, yet at the same time we're happy to accept when we walk in the room there's already a laptop existing here on the table, independent of us. No, but I mean that's what we instinctively feel, isn't it? I mean intellectually maybe not, but instinctively when we walk in we go, there's a laptop there, and it was there, it was existing there before I came. Yeah? But that's not possible according to this logic. You can't be dependent and independent. It's one or the other. And the reason we can happily accept this and that this is existing there independent of us is because we only understand these two ideas superficially. To understand these at the deepest level, we have to go to the third way in which things are dependent, and that's what's being talked about here in the text in terms of mere name, merely labelled and so forth. So the third way in which things come into existence dependently is they depend on labelling, designation or conception. So these three words mean the same thing, so if you understand one of those words you understand all three. And when we look at this idea of labelling, and this is what's being talked about in the text, we might think, okay, I think I know what that means. There's a thing here and we're calling it a laptop. Again, that's a fairly superficial understanding. To really understand that at a deeper level, what we can understand and appreciate is that when we look out on the world around us, we are receiving a mass of sense data, particularly visual data. And to make sense or meaning out of all of this stuff, what we do is we draw lines around various collections of data and create meaningful objects. Otherwise it's just data, we couldn't function. And of course we live in a world with others, meaning in order to be able to communicate with others, we have to give names to the things we've created so we can communicate. So labelling is this process of drawing a line, creating an object and then giving it a name. And how we do that is not fixed, it's completely arbitrary, depending on the meaning that we want to get out of what we see. How many things are there? How many things are there? Probably most often and most meaningful would be to draw one line, create one object and say is a star. But on other occasions it may be more meaningful to draw two lines and create two objects and say there's two triangles. On another occasion, more meaningful to draw 6 lines, create 6 objects, 6 triangles. Or 7 lines, 6 triangles and a hexagon, or maybe it's just a collection of 18 lines. So is this 1, 2, 6, 7 or 18 objects there? How many things are there? We decide. We decide. So therefore, there is no star there from its own side, because the only star that exists is the one that we've created in our conceptual mind. By drawing a line around all that data, creating one object and then giving it the name star. So therefore here, we see in the text this term, mere name, merely imputed by conception, merely labelled. So there's 2 words here, 2 terms that are very commonly used. One is this merely labelled. There are 2 words or terms commonly used here, and we see one in the text. Things are merely labelled. Merely means only, just, meaning that this star, like everything, only exists within our conceptual framework. There's no star there independent of our conceptual framework. It only exists in our conceptual framework. We create the star by drawing a line, creating an object, giving the name. And hence we see the word not findable. Not findable means you cannot find a star there in the basis from its own side, independent of our conceptual framework. There is no star to be found there in the basis. Not findable does not mean, for example, we can't find on this table a cup. That's not what not findable means. Not findable means the object cannot be found within the basis. There is no star to be found there in the basis. There's no cup to be found there in the basis from its own side, because the only cup or star that exists is the one we've created in our conceptual mind. That's what merely labelled not findable means. Any questions so far?
So what does exist?
Oh, that's still to come.
So I didn't understand why the 2 things you mentioned are dichotomous. So
Well, yeah.
going really, really backwards. So
Sure.
You said when we go down the stairs, we see that there's a laptop there, but we also all can agree that it's based on causes and conditions and parts and labeling.
Right. So
It's said there. And
something can only exist dependently or independently. They are mutually exclusive. You can't be dependent and independent at the same time.
so maybe the term of like we all agree that it's
So what I'm
we
saying,
all see it.
so
And we understand it's
it, one thing. There's one thing there.
Okay.
Is there
There's something emerging that I can label.
something? There's one thing.
No.
What's emerging is, for us, in our conceptual mind, what is emerging is a star, probably. Or for some of us, maybe what's emerging is 2 triangles.
I still don't. I understand what you're saying now, but like the 2 inherent existence versus dependent arising, for now I don't see
Right. So,
why does it
well, because,
exist?
again, yeah, because something either exists independently or dependently. It's one or the other.
That makes sense.
Right? This is dependently. That saying it's there is independent. So you can't be this and that at the same time. The fact of thinking that it's existing there independent of us. That's mutually impossible. So the reason I suggested we can accept that and accept that there's a laptop there already is because we don't understand these at a deep level. We only understand these ideas quite superficially. So that's what I'd like to do now, is go back to these ideas based on this and see if we can appreciate these ideas based on this. Because actually, each one of these, if we really understood them well, implies emptiness. But we'll look at that now.
I just want to add to it that, like for a Jewish person, this symbol already comes with a whole lot of context. For someone who doesn't know the Jewish context, it's just too tricky.
Exactly. So is there someone right and wrong, or we just have different meaning?
The object is the concept that you put on the subject.
Yeah, but there's not a object there. Is there one object there? No, because it could be two, could be... We decide how many objects are there. So labelling, I said labelling is not simply there's one thing there that we're interpreting in different ways. There is no one thing there. There's just data. We create one thing or two things or 6 things or 7 things or 18 things. We create the thing.
So, sorry, but it really reminds me of like quantum physics. It's like the same. So, how a quantum computer, for example, works. Like there is, you have like by quantum, when you observe something, you actually decide the result. But what the quantum doing, they give us a result without actually touching. How do you call it? And like they make a trap for electrons, and then like we know the results without observing it.
Yeah, I think there is a lot of parallels between this and quantum physics. And maybe tomorrow, if we get time, I'll bring in a few of those. But let's go back here now to these two ideas and try to understand this at a sort of a deeper level. So this is a timeline, this is a seed, and this is the plant that it produces. So we say that the plant exists depending on causes and conditions. The underlying cause is the seed, and the conditions are the soil, sunlight, water, and so forth. Now, we believe things exist independent of us. If that's really the case, then there should be a fixed, obvious point here where the seed becomes the plant. So at what point in this process does the seed become the plant?
We decide. We label it.
Exactly. The point at where the seed becomes the plant is the point at which this configuration of data stops looking like our concept of seed and starts looking like our concept of plant. And we all have slightly different concepts of what it means to be a seed or a plant. So for some of us, the point is already here. For some of us here, some of us here, some of us way down here. We decide when the plant comes into existence.
But the same holds for the seed itself. You can go back and back and back. And
Exactly. So the next point is the seed and the plant are in a cause and effect relationship. And if two things are in a cause and effect relationship, by definition, they cannot exist at the same time. Yeah? If they're in a cause and effect relationship, they cannot exist at the same time. Impossible. Here's the question. Does the seed stop existing before the plant comes into existence? So think about it. Does the seed stop existing before the plant comes into existence? Yes or no? Which is it? If you say no, that implies they exist at the same time. That's illogical. No is illogical. If you say yes, the seed has ceased to exist, where is the plant coming from? Yes is illogical. So both no and yes are illogical. Why? Because of grasping to things existing independently. our common sense idea of causality becomes completely illogical. It cannot function, it cannot work, because we've turned lines that we draw into boundaries. We turn them into things existing from their own side. Then, if that's the case, then things like causality cannot function. It is impossible, it's illogical. Another point, we say that the result, the plant, exists depending on the cause, the seed. But this view of emptiness is also saying that the seed depends on the plant. How does a seed depend on the plant? And the answer is not that the plant produces more seeds. How does a seed depend on the plant?
Because if there's no plant, then there's no seed, because they define each other.
Exactly. You can't call something a seed unless you have the idea plant. You can't call something a cause unless you have the idea result. Whether or not it produces it is irrelevant. Just to call it a seed implies plant. They're mutually dependent. So that's cause and conditions. Let's now look at parts. This pen exists depending on its parts. But can you find a pen here? Is that a pen? Nope. Is that a pen? No. Is that a pen? No. Is the plastic tube a pen? No. Is the ink inside a pen? No. Is the round ball on the end a pen? No. Is the other piece of metal a pen? No. Where's the pen? You've got, that's easy. The pen is the collection of that stuff. There we go. Oh, no. It has to be in a certain shape. So you have to tell me when the pen comes into existence.
When we label it.
No. No takers yet. Okay. There?
Yes.
Yes? Everyone agree? Maybe there's a few people not agreeing with you.
Why not?
No, still not. Okay.
What if it's the moment it starts functioning?
Exactly. Exactly. The pen comes into existence only when this configuration of data closely enough resembles our concept of pen. And our concepts have at least two parts, appearance and functionality. So when this configuration of data closely enough resembles our concept of pen and seems to function according to our idea of pen, then there's a pen. We bring the pen into existence. There's no pen to be found there independent of our conceptual framework, because if there was a pen existing there from its own side, it would mean that if a caveman walked in here, they'd pick it up and start writing with it. Maybe they'll pick it up and say, ooh, weapon, I'll stab with that. Or if a dog came in here, maybe see some sort of chewing stick. And if a little tiny ant came here, they may see a home to live in. So is this a pen, a weapon, a chewing stick, or a home? From its own side, none of those things. From the side of the observer, all of those things. We bring the pen into existence. There's no pen to be found here. So therefore, pen is merely labelled depending on the collection of the parts. So the pen is not the collection of the parts. So if we can understand those two things are not saying the same thing, we're starting to understand something about emptiness. So there's two statements is the pen is the collection of the parts versus the pen is merely labelled depending on the collection of the parts. So we have the basis and then we have the label. And we are applying the label pen to the basis. But what we mistakenly do is we fuse the label to the basis and we say this is a pen. And that's where the problem begins. Any questions? There's some more to go, but if there's any questions.
I have a question. If a cat walks in here, is there a laptop or not? No. Only
Cat? I mean, what's laptop for cat?
Maybe you can.
For the
sleep
cat,
on
you
it.
mean?
Yeah.
The
The
cat.
cat sleeps on the laptop.
Well, it probably sees some sort of bed then.
It's
Won't see a laptop. How can it see a laptop? Impossible.
But is it only like human conceptualization
No.
that is?
No, I mean, animals conceptualize. I mean, a dog they're more primitive, but the dog would have a concept, food, danger, whatever, you know.
And then it brings things into existence.
Yeah, of course. I mean, if a dog couldn't conceptualize, I mean, how would he be able to know food or danger? Because it's just data, it's just colour and shape. I mean, he has to interpret. So all animals, depending on the complexity of their brain and mind and so forth, have a certain level of conceptualization. If you don't, they couldn't function. You couldn't function.
And then what about flowers?
What about flowers? According to Buddhism, they don't have a mind. I mean, do they react to stimulus? Of course, but that doesn't prove that they've got a mind. It just means they just have some physical reaction to stimulus.
Can I build on that? So if the cat sees an object,
Well, first the cat is creating the object because it's just data. So if cat looks here, it may see a collection of 15 things. It may not see one object.
so they'll see this emergent property of things that we call a laptop, but cats don't.
I don't know what they would, I mean, it's hard to imagine, but it definitely wouldn't be laptop. They would definitely not have the concept laptop. That much I'm pretty sure about.
But both the cat and I will be aware of this collection of things.
Well, for you, you'll be aware. You'll be saying there's one thing there, and it's a laptop. The cat may be looking there and probably doesn't have much idea, and just sees a collection of things.
I agree with you on that, but the fact that we are both aware of the thing that I label
The thing.
the collection thing, I don't know how to use words to describe
That's why we have to be very careful here, because as soon as we start saying the thing, we've already labelled. Whether we call it laptop or bed or whatever, if as soon as you say, but we both see the same thing, then we've already labelled. There is no thing there, independent of our framework.
But we do both agree that some properties exist on the table that we both agree on that we see.
Sure. Does that mean, therefore, it exists independently? No, there's no logic there. It just means we agree. Like, most of us in this room would agree that it's a laptop, only because our conceptual frameworks are very similar. Very similar. That's why we agree, because we live in a similar culture, and therefore laptops is some meaningful, useful thing. And so we have that concept and we create that. But I mean, equally, I can look here and say, well, actually, there's a keyboard here with 50 keys. There's 50 keys here. Maybe that's more meaningful in a certain case.
I understand you, and that's why it's frustrating because there is an understanding of a physical object, thing, whatever you want to call it, laptop, that can be acknowledged by I don't know how many people or cats, and this agreement on the concept of acknowledging the whatever it is maybe implying existence of the thing or things.
Existence, yeah. No one's denying laptops exist. But just because we all agree that this is a laptop here doesn't mean, therefore, the laptop exists independent of us. There's no logic there.
I agree.
It just means we all agree laptop because we have similar concepts. That's all it implies. Same with the beauty. If we looked here and everyone in the single room agreed this cup is beautiful, does that make the cup beautiful from its own side? No, it just means we all agree that it's beautiful. We just agree. That's it. It doesn't imply anything more than that.
So why don't we, can we agree with the cat at the same time? Like, we can both agree that this object...
No, well, maybe they're not. The cat might think that there's many objects there. So you say there's one object, and the cat, if it could speak to you, goes, no, there's 50 objects here. I'm right, you're wrong. There's 50 things here. You say there's one, I say there's 50.
I don't know, I can't explain
Same with
myself,
baby.
but like I understand
Yeah,
what you're saying
yeah.
completely. I just...
Anyway, there's more coming from this tomorrow morning, but yeah, down the back.
Yeah. What about the concept in Buddhism, the concept of a living thing versus a non-living thing? I mean, after all,
Right.
a collection of cells or a collection of chemicals, when does it begin to be a living organism?
Yeah, I mean, that's a completely different question than what we're talking about here. I mean, whether we label something on an inanimate or animate basis is the same process. I mean, the question of whether it's living or not that's a completely different question. Maybe we can leave that out in this context. It's still a label, yeah, exactly.
What about abstract concepts like sila,
About what?
like ethics?
Ethics, yeah. I mean, but isn't that a concept that we've developed to explain certain things? Ethics, justice, time. Isn't time a concept that we've developed to explain this? There's a basis for that, of course, and that's useful and meaningful. If it wasn't, we wouldn't develop it because it wouldn't help. So these are all concepts that we've developed because they're useful, meaningful, and helpful. But the problem is we don't appreciate they're just concepts. We feel like they're there objectively. There's objective time there. There's objective beauty there. There's an objective laptop there. That's the problem. So that's what we do, is these lines that we draw, we turn them into boundaries. We see the world is already divided up into many separate discrete things. What's the problem with that, you might ask? Why is it a problem to see the world is already divided up into many separate discrete things? Of course, the problem is what we went through, suffering as causes chart. That's the problem. Because if we see the world as already divided up into many separate discrete things, then when we experience something as pleasant, then the beauty will be there because it's a separate thing. The beauty must be there, and we'll have attachment, aversion to unpleasant. So that's why turning lines into boundaries is the root of all of our mental afflictions and suffering. One more thing, and then maybe some more questions while I'm on that topic of boundaries, and this might help. And again, drawing lines, creating objects, no problem. We have to do that. If we don't do that, we couldn't function. There'd be no sense or meaning. It'd just be meaningless data. In most of our experiences, the very first line we draw is we draw a line around here and create me. Because there's single experience. And in single experience, there's two aspects. There's experiencer and experienced. And if we don't distinguish those two aspects, no sense or meaning. And I think a newborn baby can't do that. They have to learn to do that. So we must draw a line, create me, to distinguish the experiencer from experience. No problem there. But the problem is, of course, we don't realise that's what we're doing. We contract and we grasp onto the me part of the experience, and we see ourselves as independent of what we experience. But that is completely illogical. For example, is this big? Is it big? So big can't exist on its own. You can't have big and small. You can only have big relative to small. Like that, you can only have up relative to down, in relative to out. Like that, you can only have experiencer relative to experienced. Subject, object. Me, not me. Me, world. Me, you. Only exist relative. But what we do is we grasp onto the me and see ourselves as existing independent of what we experience. That self-grasping is exactly like saying this is big. It's completely illogical. It's completely out of sync with the interdependent nature of reality. And of course, when we grasp